The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's PSMJ Podcast Presents Update Your Strategic Plan Now to Better Navigate Business Uncertainty. My name is Kathy Cesari of PSMJ, and I'm thrilled to have with me today's guest, Susan Israel. Susan has deep expertise in architecture, strategic planning, sustainability, leadership training, and organizational change. Before joining PSMJ, she founded and led 2 architecture practices for over 20 years and that focused on delivering high-end design and architectural services. Let's go over a little bit of the housekeeping before we jump into our conversation. We will have a Q&A session at the end, maybe about 45 minutes, 50 minutes of talking with Susan. But you can put your question in on the control panel at any time. If you have a question while we're speaking, please try. I'm going to monitor that. So ask anything and we'll try to get to everyone's question. If we don't, Susan says she will get back to people, but we should have time to go through everything. Second, we do offer continuing education credits for this podcast. PSMJ is an AIA CES provider. All you need to do is send in your AIA number to customer service at psmj.com and you will receive 1 LU hour or 1 PDH credit. Now, we do give people who attend an attendance certificate that you can use internally, of course, but also you can pass into the appropriate board. We do not know if every licensed board accepts that type of credit, but we do give you a certificate of attendance. Lastly, tomorrow I'll be sending out a link to the recording. It'll also be in PSMJ Podcast Presents. If you have not done so, please download that podcast into your favorite podcast player. We're on iTunes, Spotify, we're on SoundCloud. But I'll send you the direct link and also the certificate of attendance, and there's a handout. You can download that at any time, but I will give you a link tomorrow for that as well. Now that we've covered all those housekeeping items, I can't wait to dig in. Thank you for taking time out from everyone's busy day, and you, Susan, too. Susan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh,
and
great.
Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Before we dig in, can you give a little background about, I just gave a little intro, but a little bit about yourself. I know that you have some specialties that you're, that people would be interested in knowing.
Sure. So as Kathy said, I practiced architecture with my own firms for over 20 years and focused on high-end residential and small commercial. And before that, I had worked for Moshe Safdie, Graham Gund, Feingold Alexander, Fireblend, and some other firms, Ben Thompson. And so I had a variety of sector experience there. I am very familiar with pivoting and restarted several times in deep recessions. And I pivoted, my first pivot was in architecture from, as I said, basically conventional high-end practice to more of a green practice and trying to bring clients along on the sustainability spectrum. And then after that, I pivoted completely to behavior change, organizational change, culture change around climate change issues, resiliency, and climate adaptation. And that's what I'm doing now. And then additionally, strategic planning and strategy consulting in different areas on boards with nonprofits and for startups, and particularly in the green space. So that's a little bit about myself. I have fairly deep expertise in climate adaptation overall and climate change, and looking to the future of what the world might look like in the next 10 to 50 years.
All right.
So that's
well, thank you. So before we go into it, let's get an idea of where everyone stands, maybe with a strategic plan. So let me launch the first poll. We have a poll. And let me see if everyone can see it. It says, how well has your strategic plan helped you prepare for post-COVID-19? It's great. It guided our choice and gave us clarity. Somewhat helpful. We figured we'd use it later when things get back to normal. Useless. We threw it out the window. Or we don't have a current strategic plan. If everyone can try to get their vote in, we're just going to leave it up for a little bit, and then I'll share some of the scores just to give us an idea of where everyone stands and the idea of a strategic plan. All right, a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds actually. All right, I'm going to close and I'm going to launch it for everyone to see. Okay, 12% say it's great, 44% somewhat helpful, 13% say we figured we'd use it later when things got back to normal, 9% useless, 22% say we don't have a current strategic plan. So 44% somewhat helpful. What do you think, Susan?
Oh, that's great news. And I'm curious if people want to write into the chat, or we can talk about it later. I'm curious in what ways. If you want to put it in the is it the chat, Kathy, or the Q&A that they should use?
The Q&A.
The Q&A. Some thoughts about what has been helpful with it and what has not been helpful with it. It would be interesting to hear from you. Maybe we can check back on those in a little bit. And
so Susan, walk us through this. What do you see as the best way to use the strategic planning process? Now, not a strategic plan, just the process itself, to help deal with running a firm in this current environment. I don't know if any of us have been through what's been going on lately. So how do you walk us through that?
Sure. And I'll just set a little bit of a background, which you are already probably familiar with, which is that firms have now adjusted to working remotely. Most firms who we've spoken to had robust backlogs because the market was absolutely booming. And so a lot felt like they had maybe even 18 months of a backlog. And for those who didn't, some of them, construction went on hold. They were able to pull some other projects forward, do that now for their clients, and then return to construction when it reopened. So things have not been as terrible, I think, as everybody thought it would be initially. But for firms who have slowed down and they were able to get the PPP, they've been able to take advantage of this time for some really valuable training. So the question is, if you have that time right now, what's the best way to use it? If you're doing extra training, what should that training be? And we'll come back to that in a little bit.
Now, Tiffany said that her main market sector has been wiped out completely.
Which sector is, well,
well
higher ed. There are a lot of them, restaurants, higher ed, transportation.
She says higher ed. She said
higher ed. Yep, higher ed is grim. And I don't think that the news is going to get any better. I think that there is probably a long overdue recalibration there, but they were already hanging by a thread before this ever hit. So, and even large state universities are consolidating and closing. So it's been really tough. So I don't know. So the question we're going to get to is what to do, right. how to address that. But right now, and to answer your question more directly, going through the strategic planning process itself can help you, first of all, identify what your strengths are, what your core values are. Again, everybody knows what they are, but it's really different to step back, because I always like to say you can't stop doing what you're doing when you're doing it. But additionally, it's very hard to get that kind of perspective unless you say, okay, we're going to go through a process where we're going to step back and evaluate. So the biggest problem that we've heard about, we'll come to the market conversation in a little bit, right. But the biggest problem that we've heard from firms at the moment is maintaining their culture while working remotely. When you don't have those casual interactions and you see people all the time, it's extremely hard to maintain that feeling of cohesion And the systems, the informal systems that you had in place, obviously a lot of those fall away. And so there's been a lot of adjustment in that regard. If you don't address the culture issue as you go along and the engagement issue, you will find that people aren't working as effectively, they're not as productive, there isn't the same kind of morale, there isn't the same kind of work synergy or coordination, and you won't be able to develop your staff as effectively. Additionally, as things shake out, where we saw this acute shortage of talent,
Right.
we're going to see things move around, and you really want your talent to stay with you. You don't want people to get nervous and feel like, well, I don't really know what's going on. I know that there's a lot of change. There's a lot of uncertainty. Is my firm on top of this? Do they have a plan for this? I was working on universities, and now what am I going to be doing?
Right.
Or I thought that I was on this advancement ladder, but I don't hear from anybody. And is that whole plan off? Where does this all stand? So you really want to make sure that you're reaching out and bring everybody along with you to let them know what you're thinking. And the strategic planning process can allow you to do that. There are a couple of ways of doing it. One is the people who are actually in the room, but we also, when we do them, we have polls, and so we engage everybody in the firm with our polling before, and then of course you'll reach out to everybody after. But just to know that there's this conversation going, I think can really help calm people down, bring them together, bring forward their ideas. This is, as you said, Kathy, the first time we've all gone through this, and so you may be able to get a lot of new ideas from your staff about markets, or find out that they have certain connections back to communities that you hadn't thought of that might allow them to become better seller doers. So it's really, you're going to have to dig very deep into the resources that you have to figure out the future and to make certain pivots. And the more you know about who you have and what skills you have, the better off you'll be able to do that. And a strategic planning session really starts with a self-assessment. So that's always the first step. The other thing about it is that you really want to be efficient here. You don't want to be wasting time. Every minute counts. You're going to use this gap, whatever gaps we have, whether they're the small closings or the overall pandemic, you're going to use that time to prepare for later, whatever later looks like. And the strategic planning process can help you think through all of the different factors, like what markets do you want to be in geographically, in terms of building types. You'll step back and you'll see an assessment of what you've done, and then look at what you are planning to do by looking at your current plan, if you have one, and knowing right off the bat, looking at the market data. And we are about to produce a quarterly survey. What is realistic from what's on your plan and what may have to go.
Right. Erica makes the point. She said that there's so much uncertainty, and it's constant change, and you really don't know where the pieces will end up. So that's the kind of environment we're talking about.
Yes. And right, we are in a time of complete uncertainty. We can do certain market forecasting with some certainty. We know that higher ed is not going to come booming back. We know that restaurants are going to be in trouble. There was an article in Forbes that said 85% of restaurants, small restaurants, could close permanently if the next round of funding from the federal government doesn't come through or doesn't work. And that's 16 million people who are connected to that through supply chain and in the restaurant industry. So there are going to be shakeouts. There's no question about it. But there's a certain amount that we do know of which industries are really going to be hardest hit, and we also can look at certain industries which are going to be growing. We're not going to have any less climate change. We're not going to have fewer storms or less heat or less flooding. All of that is going to have a huge impact in every year. the impacts are going to be greater and greater on the built environment. So whether you're working in the landscape, in green infrastructure, or you're working in water infrastructure, or roads, or buildings, things have to be hardened. Green infrastructure, they have to be softened. But there is a tremendous amount of preparation and adaptation that needs to happen. And architects and engineers can be right there with their clients, helping them figure out what their risks are and what the opportunities are for the firms to do some work in preparation.
So the first thing you say is to see what you have. I mean, obviously you're going to poll people and see what kind of, what you're working with and and then what you can rely on. Because one of the questions we said, someone asked was, well, we're going to wait. We're going to wait till it comes back and then we're just going to do what we did before. But is this more of an opportunity to really step back? How do you look at that? Should we look at it?
If you wait,
Yeah.
and everybody else is preparing, think about what a disadvantage you'll be at. You really need to try to project as best you can, and what you can be looking at is, where are the opportunities that you think will be in the future. So in the next 18 months, or the next, hopefully not 18 months, but in the next 6 to 12 months, everybody is COVID proofing their buildings. And so if you're a mechanical engineer, then this is actually potentially a boon, because you'll be able to bring that to all different building types as they need to improve their HVAC. There's also increasing heat. So there's when you look at COVID, you can at the same time be talking to them about what happens when there are higher loads on HVAC. So the other piece, so you looking at market forecasts is something that you're always doing all the time anyways, but you're going to be, when you're looking at developing your plan, you're going to try to slice and dice exactly what the different segments are in the work that you do, so you can figure out what's transportable to another industry. If you were making clean rooms, or if you, what are the pieces of the labs that you were doing with universities that might be transportable to hospitals or healthcare? What are subsets, so that you start to think about the component pieces? If you're working on dorms, can that be moved over to housing? Is there going to be more low-income housing potentially? So you're thinking in terms of what you can take with you somewhere else. The other part of it is, while you're stepping back and waiting, you'll be trained. This is a great opportunity for training, but you don't want to just say, okay, we're going to train more project managers. But maybe what you really need to do is look at who's selling, and how can you bring up your entire firm to be selling for you, because that's going to be the first line that you need to do, and maybe there's going to be less construction for the moment. So you want to be very focused on what you need in the next year to make you prepared for the next 3 to 4 years after that, because that would be a 5-year strategic plan.
So why don't we ask our next poll, because then we'll talk about really plan, when we talk about a plan. So the question is, has COVID changed when you were going to update your strategic plan? No, we're fine with it as soon as we can. After everything reopens in 2 to 5 years, we don't have a plan. So if everyone can give us an idea of where everyone stands. A couple more seconds. It looks like people are on board with the need to update the plan. All right, we're going to close it down a couple seconds and share the results. So it's 13% no, we're fine with it. 57% as soon as we can. 8% after everything reopens, 4% in 2 to 5 years, and 17% say we don't have one. So 57% are going to work on their plan as soon as possible. What do you think about that?
I think that's very smart.
Hmm.
I would just jump on that as soon as you can. It will help inform everything that you do from now forward. And everybody's going to have to be agile and efficient as much as they can, because you want to be ready when things are open. And you also want to set yourselves up in this next plan. Very often we always look at the different market segments and we say, okay, we're going to do X% here. We're going to take this
Right.
client and grow so much. We're going to advance, but we can't do that kind of certainty potentially at this moment. And so you might be thinking about things in a little more open-ended way, or a different way, where you might be thinking about it more in terms of geography, or even thinking about international work if you hadn't been doing that in some places that have really managed this better than we've managed it here. So but you may think about it in more general terms of what you offer, and growing that without necessarily knowing exactly where that will land. That sounds a little loosey-goosey, I know.
Yeah, but Michael says, what if we update it regularly anyway? So how often, I mean, I hate to say this, but sometimes it seems like the plan is changing every week. So how often do we have to like stick to our guns, make a plan, go after it? How often should the leadership be looking at that decisions that they make?
Normally we say you revisit your plan every year. And in
Right.
fact, when we do a strategic planning session, we will meet with you quarterly to get you through the first year and make sure that you're sticking to it. And then you really want to come back and look at it a little harder every year. But I would say we're in such an unusual situation.
Right.
I would relook at it right now, and then I would potentially look at it in the fall and look at it again at the end of the year, because then we'll really have a much better idea. Or if nothing has really changed from the fall, maybe push it to the beginning of 2021. We'll have a much better idea of the market, what's reopening, who survived. Because there's always this kind of uncertainty whenever there's a downturn.
Right.
But this just seems to be extra layers of uncertainty.
Yeah, the question is, someone's asking, how can you really plan with all this uncertainty? I mean, so the research is important, I guess, looking at what you have, where you want to go. Maybe there's some place that you wanted to go for a long time and you haven't taken the risk. What do you say to that when people are just frozen with uncertainty?
Right, and I think that's the problem. If you're frozen with uncertainty, then you know that you're not going anywhere. So
Right.
you at least need to pick a direction, and it will help you unfreeze. And you might get, you don't want to say, I'm going to invest all this time in this and then find out that it was wrong, but it will vector you towards something, which is building on your strengths and looking for the opportunities. And you may have to edge along a little differently, kind of re-vector more frequently than you would in normal times, because it's just not a straight line economy right now, and it's not going to be.
Now, as far as when I think of a strategic planning session, I remember going into the hills and staying over at night for 2 days and going through every little bit of, our polling of our employees. And is that still, I don't know, is that still on the table, or is it more liquid?
Well, right. I think that this will be very different because, first of all, pretty much nobody's doing offsites right now.
Right.
And so you're not, most offices haven't even really come back. But I think that you can do one remotely and you can bring people together. There are different ways, obviously. Zoom is having the best year that it's ever had. There are breakout rooms in Zoom. There are ways to meet with smaller groups ahead of time and maybe break it up because you're not in a remote location and you aren't constrained by the usual way that it's set up. Maybe there are some creative ways that you can set that up where there's some pre-work that's attached to it that doesn't have to be in the flow, and so maybe you're breaking that up over some half days and it's not quite as intrusive in the schedule. But I think it's perfectly fine to do it online. And there are other things, it's just a different medium, but it's the same process.
Right,
So I
right.
think it's very doable. And we also, when you do a strategic plan, you don't have the whole firm in the room at once. You usually have something between, 12 to 20 people. 20 would be huge. I've been in them that large, and it's almost too big, but 12 people online is really not that many.
Right. Erica makes the point, how do we get our clients' perspective in there? Because they're also in this world, they're being affected, and we
Right.
need to assess what we've learned from what they're going through. How do we do that?
Sure. I'm so glad you raised that because I had that in my notes. You should be holding your clients very close right now and polling them, calling them up, saying, how can we help? What's going on? I'm sure you've all done that, but I would not hesitate to reach out to them more often than you used to. Remember, they're going through exactly what you're going through. So part of what you might be asking them is, how can we help you right now? Not only what's going on, and it may not be the normal process where how can we help you means, yes, we're renovating this building and we want you to do the pre-work for that, or give us a quote. It might be a needs assessment, or it might be an inventory. If you have university clients and they're selling or they're merging, they may need some work done around that, but they're not going to come to you and say that. So the more that you can connect with your clients, say, how are you doing? What's new? Maybe you can make an informal poll, although I wouldn't send them a poll. I would call them and have a conversation and try to find out what's going on with them. Absolutely. And I would just call them.
Yeah, one of the things about PSMJ is we kind of a sweet spot is not huge firms, and we do have very small firms, but it's that middle size firm, so mid-sized firms that we usually have, that we talk to all the time. So is there an advantage to being that size, do you think, or because we can pivot maybe? I don't know. What do you think?
I would say the larger firms may feel the most distress because they really have to feed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they are much more bound to systems. So yeah, the small and the medium firms can be more agile. They can pivot more easily. They have the middle firms are kind of in good shape because they have more breadth. Sometimes the smaller firms are a little more narrowly focused on specific services, so that can make it harder for them. On the other hand, they're probably closer to their clients, and so they can be a resource because they know them a little more intimately.
So let's get back to that meeting. Now, can again, speaking for mid-sized firms, small firms, why can't I do it myself? We have management meetings. Why can't we do it on the fly? You know, is there a risk in doing the strategic planning on our own?
It's really almost it's impossible for anybody sort of individually, but really impossible for an organization to step back and look at itself very objectively, because whoever the facilitator is so deeply embedded in your culture, your aspirations, knowing what your plan is. You're going to unwittingly steer things in a certain direction, even if you don't realize you're doing it. I think a fresh perspective coming in who's able to listen to everybody. One of the things we do is we interview people. And so we kind of take all that information in without having any kind of preconceived idea about what we know about them and what we know about the firm. And so that fresh perspective allows the facilitator to listen very openly and pick up on things. And also sometimes there can be strong personalities. There can be some simmering issues that haven't really come to the forefront, or somebody really hasn't want to deal with them. So that's something that also a facilitator doesn't have that personal risk of addressing some of those issues. And right now, when people are stressed, it's quite possible that some of those personality issues and management disagreements are going to be a little bit exacerbated because everybody's really under a lot of stress right now.
Right.
It's stressful working from home. It's stressful not knowing what's going to happen in the future. It's stressful to have your clients stop work, have construction stop. And so somebody who can come in without bearing all the weight of that and help you through the process is extremely helpful. And plus, we bring in a lot of data and knowledge with us.
Right. You said because you work with other firms too, you know what's going on across the board probably. But so what other advantages do firms have right now? I mean, I know we're talking, I hate to be so down, but there's got to be advantages, a time, opportunity, taking that move that you have always wanted to do, take advantage of maybe the young professionals in the superstars in the office. What do you see as some things that we should be taking advantage of as we plan and do our strategic planning for the next 6 months or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely opportunities. So in the past, you may have seen junior staff as either kind of transient or you needed to develop them in a certain way by giving them skills, but you're going to really need to elevate them more at this point and bring them on board to help you represent the firm. Maybe there are ways that they can connect into the community or into your client community and represent the firm online. Now you don't have to fly everybody around the country to go to a conference and speak for the firm. There are a ton of meetings going on every day, all day, everywhere. So it's much less expensive and more efficient to get in front of different audiences. And now you can do that obviously at the senior level, but you can start to cultivate your junior personnel to bring them along. The other thing is right now, I think for some reason this doesn't really come up so much in management conversations, but we are at a moment in this country of social divide and social interest from the younger generation across the board. But we're looking at Black Lives Matter. This is a major movement. This is the civil rights part 2, and I think that it will be important that firms respond to that and respond to climate change. And your most passionate, interested staffers will probably be your younger ones. And so maybe there's a way that they can take that passion, represent the firm in a little bit of pro bono work, reaching out to the community, reaching out to organizations who are needing some kind of work, whether it's architectural pro bono or other kind of volunteer work, but that gets your name out there, not just to be cynical about this, that it's marketing, but they're doing work that counts, but also you're helping the community. And if you're more of a locally based firm, that will be really important to show up. The other part of that is that you are going to need some bona fides when this is all over, that you actually paid some attention. We are an extremely white profession. And so I think that it will be important to say, yes, we're paying attention. We know what's going on. We're supporting change, and this is how we've done it. And if you can't do it directly in your work, or you don't have people in the office directly to support, you can certainly do that through the community. And your younger staff, I think would really welcome that. They're very possibly already paying attention to everything, and it will help them engage and really support you better if they see that you're paying attention to what their passion is. And I'm not saying it's just younger people. I mean, I'm passionate about those issues too. My kids call me a hippie. So, but I think it's important to look at things very holistically, and that will help not just with your retention and with your development of your younger staff, but also with your clients. I think that they'll appreciate that you're really paying attention to what's going on, beyond what's on the screen.
So with just to get back to some practical ideas, with so much on our plate, how do we justify it? How do we justify stopping? Because everyone wants to get everything done. Like you said, we're burning through our backlogs. Some of us have a lot of work to do right now, and we're trying to get more work in what we know best. So how can I justify and say we have to take a step back? This is not sustainable right now. So what do you think?
Well, I think you have to take a step back, because if all you do is burn through your backlog and then it's done, then what do you do? So it's always a problem in this profession. It's feast or famine. And there's always the question of how you prepare for the next downturn, which I guess is inevitable, as much as it doesn't necessarily feel like it right now. So you really need to be doing that far planning. And you may also be investing a certain amount of time in marketing in a certain direction that isn't a good direction to go in anymore. And so that's just going to be a waste of time. So you really want to make sure that where you are focused, it's only 2 days. At the end of the day, it's a lot of people, but it's 2 days. You've stepped back, and you might find, okay, we were working so hard on doing this, but we're not going to need that in the future. We can sort of, use what we've got until we get to a certain point, but that's not a direction that we're going to be moving in the near future. So let's not burn any more energy on that. You might be marketing to the wrong direction.
Right. So let's ask a final poll question. So if we are going to have a planning session, who in the firm should we invite? So this is, you can pick more than one, pick as many as you feel is necessary, but young superstars, human resource director, outside consultant, just partners, or marketing director. And we'll who should be there in those strategic planning session, or days, 2 days if you do that. As you said, someone had 20 people, so that's the whole firm sometimes. So let's see, and I'm going to stop it, and this is our last poll. I'm going to close it in a little bit. Yeah, everyone, you can pick as many as you want, so it's really okay. Let me close it now, and let me launch it, share it with everyone. 62% want the young superstars there, 46% human resource director, 46% outside consultant, 59% just want the partners, and 68% want the marketing director there. So what do you say, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to everybody, obviously, that there are going to be marketing changes. Happy to see that so many want to bring along the young superstars, because I think it's going to be important to retain your really good talent, and you're going to need all the diversity of age and outlook that you can have to be creative about how to move forward and maybe how to think about things a little differently. So there's I think, was it 62% wanted just the
Yes, no, only 59%, but 59% said just the partners.
Just the partners.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that if you're going to have just the partners, and that's what you traditionally do, that you also make sure that you do hear from everybody else in the firm and bring them along with it. I think especially now where people are, if they're still working remotely, are feeling a little bit anxious and cut off, then that will be helpful. I was talking to a more junior architect, and she kept talking about the powers that be and needing training at the junior level, that they don't really feel, and these are sort of early career women, that they're not feeling like they really want to build their skills and they really want to get better. But they felt very much that there was a divide between them and the principals. And she even said, well, there's the women principals group that meets, not in the firm, but this is in the BSA. And we don't know all the things that they talk about. And I think that your junior staff will be so much more valuable to you when you include them. If you don't want them in the process, I can certainly understand that there are financial issues that you want to keep close. That makes sense, but I would just say include them in some way, and particularly now try to include the firm in a larger way. I think I want to just share a couple of things that I heard that I sort of skipped over and that I was going to bring up with this, which is they're just details, but one of them is one of the firms. I was talking to a principal, and it was a women principals meeting, and she said that as they come back to work, this is in Boston, and we've just started. We have been behind the country in a lot of ways in reopening, and I think we're at 50% capacity right now. And they're doing all the normal things like arrows on the floor. There are some very specific things that are required. But they did a deep cleaning, not because they had to, because nobody had actually been in the office for 3 months, so there really wasn't a need for it. But they did a deep cleaning because people were nervous about coming back, and they thought psychologically that would help them make the jump. So you have to think about where people are in terms of, there's a lot of anxiety out there, and the more that you can do to calm that down and make people comfortable with where they are, even if, everybody's reading the papers, everybody knows where we all are, but whatever you can do within the firm to calm people down or lighten things up. There was another firm where they, at the beginning of the quarantine, they sent everybody a box of organic food, cooler from a local farm full of organic food, and then they had a mask making party, or somebody made masks for everybody. They were sending around personal photos. There was a lot of trying to knit the group together. They were already a tight group, but they spent a lot of focus on that. And so while you're looking at the big strategy and the numbers, you also have to remember that you're dealing with people who are having their own crisis. And another thing that I didn't touch on is that this pandemic is not the same pandemic for everybody, and it's not happening synchronously across the country. So Boston, New York, we had our big wave. California had the big shutdown. Now we're all doing better, and now some of the southern states are getting slammed. You look at some of the charts right now, and they are just going up and up and up, whereas it's calmed down here. So this is going to roll around the country back and forth for quite a while, and everybody's going to potentially, your clients, if they're somewhere else, are in a different place from where you are. So it's just something to bear in mind, that the experience that you're having in your city may not be uniform across your client base or your consultants. Potentially, if you have any employees who have gone to work someplace in another location since they're working remotely.
Yeah, I know that we've talked about how people think of strategic planning and, numbers and markets. And I know you and I talked about, make sure that the culture is covered when you plan. And I don't think it should be thrown out now at the time, but people are apt to just gloss over that now. And you say it's more important than ever. So
Yeah, I think it is more important than ever. At the end of the day, it's people who show up and are doing the work for you. It's not the statistics that you put on paper about what your goals are. And this is just a very strange time. People have reacted to it in all different ways. It's not just it's not an economic downturn in the way that we have all experienced them before. It's really kind of a different beast. And they'll help you get through this if they feel like they're really being connected to. But if they're home alone, or there's 50% density, can feel a little bit odd in an office, and you don't want people to be slowed down by feeling disconnected.
right. So now I think that we only have 15 minutes left, so we should probably open up to questions from the audience. So while people are getting those questions in, just put it in the Q&A, or if you want to open your mic, we can do that too. Just let me know. But I just want anyone to know that Susan is, she's willing to, take your emails, and, if you can't think of a question now, or if you don't really want to bring it up in a forum, you can reach out. Is that right, Susan?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
And we do have that brochure that if you want to, download it now, and I'll have a link later, but it does kind of, maybe there's something in there that you don't understand, you want to reach out to Susan later, that's great. So if anyone has any questions, put them in now. And while we're doing that, I just want to remind everyone that this is the time for the plug, but I do have PSMJ membership, and with membership you get the free senior executive briefings. We have a discussion board that is just going crazy now because people ask each other questions. It could be as simple as, what financial software do you use, to, where do I find the best way to, use, I don't know, financial KPIs or something like that. So we are very busy. The discussion board has over 1,000 people on it, and they're all CEOs and HR directors and all that. So, and they're very willing to help. So if you aren't a member, please think about becoming a member. We also have group membership, so everybody in the company can share in the information. And also, Frank wanted me to mention that we are going to be meeting in Martha's Vineyard this year for, strategic planning and what's next. And it's a very small group. He only takes, I don't know how many people, but first come, first serve. So he says, please mention it. You can reach it by go to Next Normal. But that's a go. And we're going to meet on Martha's. It's always a good time, but more than that, it's, you talk strategically, and you get to talk to other people and network and learn from others. So I think that's what we're mostly talking about. Like right now, you don't have to have all the answers, right, Susan? I mean, we don't have all the answers. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, the process of going through the plan will help you find the answers. You may feel like when you start, you don't know what the answers are,
Right.
but the process of making it will help you focus in a different way. The conversation itself, some of the knowledge that we'll bring into it, some of the polling, but you start to think about it differently and again, that's another reason to step back. It's very hard to get out of the daily mindset and sort of nagging in the back of your mind the next thing that you're supposed to do after this hour is over. Yeah, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But when you really fully commit yourself to 2 days of thinking about it and getting a little bit of a fresh perspective, opening it up for anything, and I think at this point you have to be thinking much more broadly than you may have in the past. You may have been very focused on your narrow skill set, but you are now going to have to be creative and agile to really do well with this, and be preparing. Once you've got that plan, then you can sort of take a deep breath and say, okay, we have a better direction than we had before. We knew our plan needed to be updated. or we didn't have a plan, or we knew our plan was only maybe 50% of what we needed it. Now we have a plan, and even that will just allow everybody to just regroup and, sorry about that, turn that off, regroup and focus on what you really need to get done right now. Cut out any dead wood that's not going to get you there. And I think it is just a perfect time to do it.
I have some hands raised. I'm not sure if they want to open up their mics. I'll ask one at a time, but Jack, I'll open your mic. Do you want to ask a question? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Jack? Oh, no?
No, thanks.
All right. Thank you. And Jennifer had hers up. Jennifer, do you want to ask something?
No, thank you.
All right. I had some hands up. I didn't know. And then lastly, Kevin. Okay.
No, not this time.
All right, great. Well, I have a couple of questions, Susan, before we adjourn. But how important is it to get together in person? Some people are saying that they want to wait. They don't want to do a Zoom meeting. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, you would get together in person, absolutely. I think it's important and it's productive. But we're not living in an ideal world. And I think at this point, speed over perfection is what you're going to have to settle for, and that you can get it's the nuance that you won't have, but it's some nuance that obviously is missed when you're working on the computer. It's definitely not ideal, but it's much better than waiting, because if you wait until you can get together, we don't really know when that will be. So then you're working with an outdated plan or no plan. So I would say, yeah, it's not ideal. I'll be honest about that, but I think it's still preferable.
So, you know how it is when you meet for strategic planning and people are not engaged with that process anyway, but now you're not even in the office and people don't even see you missing. So how do we engage the rest of the team in the process?
Yeah, we always do a poll ahead of time with everybody in the office, and then of course you'll report out. I think in this case it would be important to have a little bit more than that, and maybe create some of your own polls of things that you're looking for. I would add some supplemental questions at this particular time to the ones that I do, trying to draw out what are some of the hidden potentials that you might not know about in your staff or interests. I think it's important to be in good communication, so you might do some conversation ahead of time, but definitely be bringing them along with the plan when it's done. And then maybe when it's done, you revisit it with everybody on a regular basis, which is not what's normally done. Normally it's kind of one and done. You send it through the firm, this is what we're doing, and you move forward. But I think that it would be good to touch base following up after as well. A little, maybe it's every couple of months, but just kind of reconvene and make sure people know that you're still paying attention to everything.
And our final question, if we do have to make a pivot, how can we do that while we're all working remotely? Is that something that can be done? Have you seen that done?
Well, we've never been in a situation where we've all been working remotely.
Right, right.
Can't say I've seen it done, but I don't think that it's as different as from when you're in the office, because what the pivot looks like, I mean, what's different is you can't go meet with clients, but everybody's meeting online, or potential clients.
Right.
I think there's actually much more information out there right now. It's much easier to learn about different industries and find out what's going on, because there is just a waterfall of information on the internet every single day. So in a way, it's easier to do the research that you need to do to make the pivot. It's easier to connect to people because they're more open to it. people are actually more available because they're in their office, they're not flying around. You can get face-to-face with people in smaller groups and different kinds of convenings that are online. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for making the pivot now that you wouldn't have normally when you've got to wedge in some travel or conference time or learning about something and the resources aren't there. This, in some ways, this may be an easier time to make the pivot.
So that looks like all the questions we have. Do you want to make any last statement that we want people to, do we want people to work on their strategic planning? Obviously. So what can you leave us with to maybe put that fire underneath us?
Yeah, I think that what happens in a situation like this, when there's a change, the ones who prepare, when you look at past downturns, the firms who took that time and really prepared for coming out of it ready to go. They knew where they were going. They knew what their objectives were. They had done the preparation. They had retrained, retooled, and they took that time to hunker down and get ready. They took off when things opened. And the firms who waited, just kind of laid everybody off, and maybe they couldn't do anything other than that, but the ones who just kind of waited it out struggle when they come back. They're not ready and they get run over. So I would say that this is, even though it's a weird time because you're busy, but it's a lull in a certain way. And it's a little harder in some ways to add in. For some firms who are still busy, it may be harder to add in that training because you're not slow.
Right.
But some firms are slow. So I think this is the moment. If you are slow, I don't know what else you'd be focused on right now that could be more important, frankly, than figuring out where you're going. So
Right.
I would say this is the moment. Be ready.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up right now, and thank you everyone for spending the time. Again, if you want to reach out, you have her email address, and you have mine. Mine is csaseri@psmj.com, or customer service too. I'll get the messages. But thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. And Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Kathy.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.